So Lee, we'll start with just asking you a bit about yourself and what you do and kind of the purpose of this interview today.
Sure. So my name is Lee Watanabe-Crockett, and we're here to really talk about teaching and learning and assessment and how it's shifting in this day and age and what that means for schools, how the world outside of school is impacting what we have to do, and just really what that vision is for the future for our kids. And I'm excited to be chatting with you about that.
So how do you see learning in the 21st century?
Learning in the 21st century, there's a lot of people talking about 21st century learning, which is hilarious considering that we're getting on to 20 years into the 21st century already and still having that conversation about what is 21st century learning. I just think of it as future-focused learning. It's a constant evolving benchmark. Where are we going and what does that mean learning has to look like? And I work in a dozen countries and with schools from everything from kindergarten through to university. And it doesn't matter where I go, the challenges facing education are pretty similar. And so for me, when we look at what's required for students to be successful in the life beyond school, then that means that we have to shift what we are doing in school. And the simplest way to describe it is to move from teacher-centered learning to learner-centered learning. There certainly was a time when we required an educational system that meant that we cultivated talent. We cultivated mathematical experts and experts in English language that could then go out to a remote area, to a school, and then communicate to that next generation what that knowledge looks like. And they were really the information delivery system is what they were. But in this age, where we all have 24/7 instantaneous access to the sum total of human knowledge in the palm of our hands, then that means we have to shift what we're doing. No longer is the teacher or the textbook the only source of information, and often not even anywhere close to the best source of information. So the role of teaching has to shift. If we have access to all the knowledge that we could possibly need, then how does school have to change? And it has to change by allowing learners to learn in any way that speaks to them, but cultivate their capacity as self-functioning, capable, independent learners. So that means moving to learner-centered learning, where the learner is responsible for the learning.
How do you think technology has affected students in the 21st century?
There's so many conversations around technology and education and what it actually means. Certainly it's given us ubiquitous access to information. It's also, many people look at the current generation and think that what it's done is it's created this distance where kids are completely connected to their devices. But it's a different world, and what it's done is it's allowed us to be in contact with anybody, anywhere on the world at any time. So it's created a real understanding of who we are in the world. It used to be that news came to you and it would days, weeks even after it actually happened, if you even got that information at all. Now we're able to know everything in real time and look at it from any different angle. So it's really transformed how students view the world, and that's causing them to reflect on how they view their country. Interestingly enough, well, a lot of people think that there's this huge digital divide now that's happened where students are lacking social skills. I find that technology has allowed us to be more social than ever. It's allowed us to connect in deep and meaningful ways and for longer periods of time without that separation of distance. And at the same time, there's this other aspect of it where we have been so focused in these different technologies that we have created some people that have never felt more alone. And as a result now we're seeing a shift and a balance where people are balancing and mediating their use of technology with their desire to connect with people in authentic ways. And it's that desire to connect with people in authentic ways that allows us to transform school, because we can allow students to solve problems that matter and things that connect to them.
So is there kind of like a standard way or a simple way that you would explain solution fluency to students?
The thing is that there is no right or wrong way to do this. Everybody would really like it if I could just put education in a box or a bottle and we could sell it, and if we could, I'd be a billionaire. But the thing is that we don't educate data. Everyone focuses on data. Well, what is the data? The data is irrelevant. We're dealing with human beings. Students are human beings. They're not data. And we don't teach subjects, we teach children. And so we really have to understand that this is a human process. Solution fluency is a structured problem-solving process. It's what you do when you don't know what to do. If I was to define it to students, I would say it's solution fluency, or any of the fluencies, are what you do when you don't know what to do. And that structured problem-solving process is so, so important. It definitely is the critical thinking and analytical thinking that is the biggest general capability. So how do I introduce it to students? It depends. We never do it the same way twice, because no two learners are the same. But the common thread amongst that is that it is not an intellectual process, it's an experiential process. So I can walk you through the 60s and explain them to you, and that'll give you an intellectual understanding of it, but it won't give you any capacity to work with it. It's only when you do it. And that's the whole point. It's a process, it's the way you do things. So I just prefer to just give solution fluency to learners and let them muck about and let them see what happens. And then the important part of it is that debrief, to reflect on what went well and look at how we can improve not only the product but the process. How do I become a more effective problem solver in the future? And if we have a structured process, then we can reflect on the language of that process and the stages of that process. And I find that after learners have been working with solution fluency for a while, they become formidable problem solvers, even in the primary level. You know, last week I was at a school that I work with in Melbourne, and it was marvelous. You know, that as the students build capacity with solution fluency, they start to just find that they can use it in other areas of their lives. So I've seen where it's all of a sudden become restorative justice. It's how students deal with conflict with each other. I've seen where schools have used it for strategic planning. But last week, I had this wonderful experience where the prep class was reading a book called Out, which is about escaping war and being a refugee and looking for asylum in another country. And it talked about the problems of not having access to food and not having a safe place and all of those things. And as opposed to dealing with it like most young people would, which would be to look at it and say, that's terrible, these students have the capacity with solution fluency. So even though it wasn't a subject in the school, even though it wasn't the focus of the unit, these young learners said, hey, we can solve that. We can do something about it. And at prep level, they put together a food drive from local businesses and collected food and then wrote letters to deliver to asylum seekers in Australia. See, they've learned the capacity to solve problems that matter in the world. And that's really, for me, the purpose of solution fluency, is to empower young people to understand that they can accomplish anything and they can fix anything if they wish to.
Do you think that things like solution fluency would have helped you when you were at school?
Absolutely. I was a very unique and difficult child and a challenging learner for my teachers, because I was a very strong, self-directed learner with a high capacity, and they couldn't feed me fast enough. So what I really needed to have happen was for teachers to get out of my way and to allow me to learn. And when I went to school, it was very much a teacher-centered process where one teacher speaks. And when one teacher speaks, then you're only speaking to, if you think about it, if the teacher is doing the talking and the teacher is guiding the lesson, then we're actually only teaching to one child. If you happen to be that child or similar to that child, then you're going to have capacity to thrive in that environment. But what about the rest of the learners? We can't really differentiate the learning. We can't allow students to learn at their own rate, at their own speed. We can't allow them to be successful unless we move to a learner-centered environment where learners can interact and collaborate and can support each other. That's what learning is.
Do you think that solution fluency, do you think the process is something that's accessible to like every student is able to?
Yeah.
And everyone will benefit from it?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, how does it work? And when I first started this work, even I had assumptions, and I'm always saying to teachers, please do not underestimate the learners. Please do not, because they have so much more capacity than we think they do. Even though I know that, I still made assumptions about it. For example, what would happen at the pre-K level, or what would happen at the kindergarten level? And teachers said to me, hey, you know, what do you think we do all day? We teach language. So dog, cat, define, it's just another word. We can teach this to our learners. And so what I'm seeing now is that at the pre-K level, I'm seeing learners that are 3 and 4 years old that understand solution fluency can explain to me the 6 Ds, show me how they're using it, and can tell me which one matters and which one's the most important and things like this. So the thing about solution fluency is it becomes a common language. So from kindergarten through to senility really is the age range for it. It can be anywhere. And it gives us that structure to have conversations around what does problem solving look like and how do we get better at it as a structured process. So yeah, I think it fits at I've seen it in every year level. I find that it's an essential process that works really, really well.
What do you think that the best skill a student can learn is?
When I first started this work a decade ago and looked at the problem of how do we transform teaching and learning and assessment, one of the first questions I had was, what are the skills that students need to be successful in their life beyond school? And so I asked people all over the world this question at every level, from teachers to students to parents, community leaders, business associations, governments. I kept asking this question. And everywhere I went, I got the same answers. So very, very interestingly, they would say things like students need problem-solving skills. They need the ability to be creative. They need the ability to collaborate with others in real and virtual environments. They need the ability to communicate, and not just in text or speech, but in multimedia formats. And then another large area where people would say they need to understand other cultures, other religions, other ways of doing things. They need resilience. They need to be self-reflective. They need to have some ethics. All of these other things would come up. And when I looked at it, it was kind of universal that this is what everybody said was required. And my question at the time was, well, why is that not the curriculum, full stop? If this is what our learners need, why is that not the curriculum? And over the last decade, we've seen that kind of develop. So New Zealand has the key competencies, Australia has the general capabilities, IB has the learner profile. Pretty much every curricula everywhere in the world has this set of values or ideas that they put on the front page. And my question was, well, how does that happen? Like, we can't just stand over students and say, be creative, and magically it's going to happen. Like, there has to be a process. And that's what led to the fluencies. So if we think of problem solving, it's solution fluency. Analytical thinking, information fluency. Creativity, creativity fluency. Communication, media fluency. And then that large area of ethics, action, and accountability is global digital citizenship. And that's the whole bit about resilience and an understanding other cultures and other religions and other ways to do things. This is essential for me. So this is what the world said are the things that students need. If I was to say what is the one thing that I want learners to have, my wish is that all learners would develop compassion. And compassion for themselves and compassion for their fellow man. And if we do that, we can transform anything that happens in the world. So for me, the fluencies are the skills in order to allow that to happen, to change the world by changing what education looks like at a classroom level and empowering a generation to solve problems that matter and create a bright future for everyone. That's my wish.
You said earlier that you'd worked with not just schools but corporate areas and whatnot. Have you found that solution fluency has worked better in certain areas, or has it pretty much been the same all over?
So the processes of the fluencies came from industry. It came from my experience working in business. So they were the structured processes that I went through, and I had to just sit down and dissect them because, being a creative person and having studied arts at the Academia in Florence, like I have this belief that, well, creativity is just something that it just happens. Like, how do I do it? And then when I started really looking at it and dissecting it, I realized that it was actually a structured mental process, that creativity was a left and right-brained activity and process. And then as I researched it and talked to professors and people that are smarter than I am that really look at the brain in interesting ways, I realized that, gosh, it really was a process. Same with solution fluency. I broke down, well, what are the structured steps that I go through to solve a problem? What does it look like? And then it was just aligning it to language that made sense, so the 6 Ds. But if you look at the 6 Ds of solution fluency, it directly parallels the scientific method. It's exactly the same as the writing process. It's exactly the same as design thinking. It's kind of, I joke, it's like one process to rule them all. It's like the Lord of Rings of problem solving would be solution fluency. But it's just the same process, but it's in a language that we can speak about and communicate. It's worked in every place. And so it's not just as a structured learning process, which fits in well with STEM or PBL or anything like that. But as I said, it's also restorative justice. It's also how we do strategic planning. It's many, many things. So it fits in as a process in every industry.
So you've been doing some work with schools, the teachers in the schools, about how to implement solution fluency into the classroom. How are they kind of reacting to that?
Wow, that's an interesting question. How do you think that the reaction has been from teachers? What would you expect teachers how they would respond to this idea?
Ooh, I think it would vary quite a bit. I think some teachers would jump at the idea and like a new and exciting learning method, because I mean the curriculum is quite like there and like structured, and the way of teaching is really kind of traditional. Do you find that some teachers would have a bit of trouble implementing it though, say if they've been in education for a longer time than others?
You know, that's a really, really great question, and it's very insightful. It is different for different teachers because we're all human beings. But here's the common thing. It doesn't matter how long we've been in education. I want you to think about this, because most people don't realize this. The average teacher, by the time they start teaching, didn't just go to uni for a couple of years and become a teacher. That teacher has been inside of a classroom for their entire lives since the age of 5 or younger. And so by the time they step foot in front of their first class, they've already had 15 or 20 years of having teaching, learning, and assessment modeled to them for 8 hours a day or more. So we already have a really fixed mindset about what teaching looks like. And that's tough to break, whether you're a first-year teacher or whether you've been teaching for 50 years. So I find that length of time doesn't matter. But what I find is that person to person, it makes a difference. And that's the interesting part of it, is getting people to get the mindset shift in. You see, you also made an interesting statement that we have a lot of curriculum and it's fixed, and so that means that we have to teach in a certain way. You know, I want teachers to understand that they are not responsible for teaching the curriculum. Learners are responsible for learning the curriculum. That's the point. If it was just teaching, then a teacher could walk in, walk through each subject, present each concept, and then say, oh, I've checked all the boxes, I taught it, but they didn't learn it, not my problem. I taught it, that's my role. It's not. Our purpose here is for the learners to learn it. Now, if we understand that, then we can be open to, well, how do the learners learn it? And the teacher explaining it or presenting it is only one possible way. But ultimately, we want to create learner-centered learning. We want the learners to have the capacity. What happens in a lot of traditional schools, if you think about it, and one of our goals is to create learners as they leave year 12 that are functional, capable, independent learners. Wouldn't you agree? That's what we want, lifelong capacity as learners. So then follow my logic on this. The easiest job then in the school system should be the year 12 teacher, because those students should be borderline capable, functional, independent learners and only need minor assistance from us. But the traditional structure of schools is that as we move through the school system, we do more compartmentalization, more departmentalization, more teachers taking on responsibility, more teachers trying to teach everything, more teachers being stressed about whether kids are going to get their HSC or not, and less of learners being responsible for their learning. And so when you leave us at the end of year 12, and you spend that few months surfing and then arrive at university, now all of a sudden you're supposed to be functional, capable, independent learners. How does that happen? It has to happen in the school system, which means we gradually, throughout the journey of a learner, have to move responsibility and release responsibility and progressively withdraw so that learners have that capacity. And that's the work I do with schools, is getting teachers to that point. So when I get them to understand that they're not responsible for teaching, but the learners are responsible for learning, and that their job is to bring the possibility for learners to learn into their sphere with strong connection and interesting conversation, then we can shift to teaching.
What would you say to those teachers who have that sort of fixed mindset on, I've been teaching for this long or whatever, this solution fluency isn't going to do anything for me? Like, what would you say to those people?
There's a lot of suffering involved in transforming practice for teachers. It's not like any other industry. It's not like when I'm dealing with engineers or when I'm dealing with law firms or anything else. Teachers, as I said, have been in the classroom since they were 3 or 4 years old. So the other thing about teachers is that they love their kids and that they want to do what's best for them. So you have to realize that it takes some compassion. Teachers have to be compassionate with themselves And I have to be compassionate with them as they gradually make a shift, because it's something that's very old, it's very deep, they've been doing for a long time. It would be like me saying, you know what, the way that you've been walking for the last 40 years, we can do it better. So we're going to go to a new way of walking. It's such a deep thing. It's so ingrained in us. So it takes some compassion, it takes some humility. But I found that there is no teacher that would believe that their pedagogy is beyond reproach, and that everybody can start to make shifts in their practice. And the 10 shifts of practice is what really we're working with now with Lindisfarne teachers, is how to constantly revisit an active research, action research methodology to look at their practice and constantly improve it. And solution fluency is one of those ways. Usually I find if we, I've never found anybody that said this isn't for me. I've found people that said I'm not sure that this will work in my subject area. But normally if we give them the opportunity to see how their subject area can connect to the real world and problems that matter for our learners, then we can get the shift. The thing that we must understand, the most important thing, is that the research and the brain research shows very clearly that if a learner is not emotionally connected to the learning, that the learning doesn't happen. It's actually neurobiologically impossible to think deeply about things you don't care about. So we have to, our number one job has to be to give our learners problems that matter and that matter to them, and then to find a way to apply the curriculum to those problems. That has to be how teaching has to shift.
Just kind of with the whole curriculum thing, there's kind of like structured assessments too that we have to do. Do you think that having something ordered to go off for assessments would kind of alleviate some of the stress that can be caused by it for students in the higher years of high school?
Yeah, there's lots of conversations around assessment and what assessment should look like and could look like. You know, the one thing I can tell you is when we look at high stakes testing like NAPLAN, for example, there's absolutely no research in any country, anywhere in the world, that standardized testing like that has improved student outcomes. Not one. Not one case at all. Conversely, what happens is high stakes testing like NAPLAN focuses to focus on content. Now, I just mentioned the importance of relevance and context and an emotional connection to the learning, and that actually the science shows very clearly that if there is not an emotional connection, the learning doesn't happen. So here's what happens in high stakes testing environments. What's happened in Australia is that the focus on NAPLAN means that a lot of schools that are not performing well in NAPLAN have shifted their focus onto literacy and numeracy. And they're teaching literacy and numeracy as if they're subjects, and they're not. They're outcomes, they're skills, they're the product of good teaching. You become literate not because someone focuses on literacy, but because you have the opportunity to speak and to read and write. That's how we become literate. So the schools that have focused heavily on programs that have to do strictly with literacy and numeracy, gosh, all of a sudden their NAPLAN results are actually going down. They're not going up. Why? No context and relevance. So we have to remember the importance of context and relevance in the learning for the learning to happen. There's always going to be high stakes testing. What I've found is that when we build students' capacity for resilience, so we talk about resilience for the learner all the time, but we never allow our learners to fail, because we spoon feed and we structure everything and make it easy. But if we allow our learners to constructively struggle, if we give them processes like solution fluency so they can be successful, and we build their capacity for higher level thinking, I've found that students have no trouble sitting and challenging any exam that is put in front of them, and without the stress involved in it, because they understand the process and their capacity to be exceptional.
With solution fluency being implemented in schools all around the world, do you think that once people my age leave school and if they want to be teachers or something, do you think that learning will improve significantly?
I'm already seeing that happen. I'm seeing learning transform inside of a week in some schools. There's a thing that I refer to it, you know, people talk about professional learning, but I think of my work as professional transformation, because I'm not looking to have teachers apply a new trick that next week they're going to do something different. I'm looking for them to fundamentally change and transform how they look at learning and how they look at children. And an amazing thing happens. Very shortly, and it's different for each teacher, but very shortly in the process of utilizing the fluencies and shifting to learner-centered learning, there will be a moment where a teacher comes to me and says, I have to show you what my kids have done. This is amazing. I had no idea they could do this. And they show me the work. And at that moment, they're transformed professionally. They will never go back to what they're doing. And it usually comes at that moment when they realize that they've been grossly underestimating their kids, and that in fact, despite our best intentions, that the biggest impediment to learning is teaching.
Yeah.
So do you feel that Solution Fluency has given you capacity to be more independent and proactive in your life as a learner and what you'll do beyond school?
I think so, yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, along with like the teachers that are doing it as well. So not just us, even though it is focused on our learning and how we're going to achieve that. Definitely the teachers do help, and yeah.
I found that once we were kind of given this project, we'd never heard of like something we like. What
Yeah,
do you
it
mean we have to do it on our own?
Like,
kind of
you're the
thing.
teacher, you just tell us what to do and we'll do it.
Yeah, and then it kind of helped us to almost develop some leadership skills, and that we were able to kind of put ourselves into groups on who's going to do what, break down the Solution Fluency. So it's all kind of it was like a nice method, like a recipe to follow almost. And so
Yeah.
everyone kind of had a part. We were all on the same page, even if we were in different groups. And the end result kind of reflects like our cohesion, I guess, that was able to occur because of the Solution
Yeah,
Fluency.
I think the project turned out quite well,
Mm.
and I don't think we would have achieved those results if we didn't follow
Definitely.
the Solution Fluency.
And even with being in different groups to do different parts of the project, it was like we all had to be on the same page. So the end result was the same. I found it really helpful because I was kind of in charge of writing the lyrics, and I wanted to know, well, what am I writing about? And does everyone know that that's what we're doing? And
yeah,
are we
what's
all,
the purpose of this?
Yeah.
So now that you've worked with Solution Fluency a little bit, how do you feel when you go into a traditional classroom that's very teacher-centered?
It's very different. I just feel like I'm being talked at,
Yeah.
and I'm not really, not understanding, but it's not really going into my head what I'm being taught about. It's here's the work, here's the curriculum, that's what it is. Whereas Solution Fluency, oh, I can do this way, and I can learn, and it's just I learn better with Solution Fluency.
Yeah, I think it's definitely what we were saying before, more accessible to the learner, because I find it really hard to absorb information when the teacher's
When
kind
it's
of
just being talked at you.
like, here's another piece of information and here's another piece, and it's like, wow, hang on a second. I think it kind of just gives you time to take it in as you kind of can process it at the kind of,
Yeah.
yeah.
So if I could wave my magic wand and transform school to look like anything, what would you as learners want to see school look like?
Not solely Solution Fluency, but definitely learner focused, instead of it just being us handed the curriculum and having to just take the information. And I feel like with Solution Fluency, I'm able to apply it to my life in general, and it kind of changes you as a person, like you were saying before, like leadership and being independent, and it definitely helps with all aspects of life, not just learning in schools.
Yeah, and more, yeah, definitely what Hayley was saying with not being completely like the teachers do nothing and the students do all of it.
No.
Which I definitely don't think is the end goal in any case. But yeah, just more that we are able to kind of it kind of holds us accountable for our own learning, and it's not like, oh, I don't get it, so I'm not going to bother. Like when the teacher's talking, you're like, well, it doesn't make sense, so therefore I'm going to fail, and it's like, it just kind of gives you...
Yeah, you can take your time with a structured process, and it helps
you.
you.
Control, like a sense of control over what you're learning.
So you'd like to see more of a process where teachers are facilitating, but that you're learning independently. That's what it sounds like you're driving at.
Yeah, the structured learning is very helpful, especially if you, like for an assessment, if you don't know where to start and you have this structure, it's very easy to accomplish.
Yeah, definitely.
So what do you think is the future for students coming into this process? Because you're near the end of your K-12 experience anyways. So if you now imagine that at prep you started working with Solution Fluency and started being independent, how do you think that would have transformed your learning? So how do you think it will be for the younger learners coming through?
I think my marks would have been incredible, because I would have been learning in a way that I can understand, in a way that I can process myself. And I think it would have just, especially in these last years of high school, if a teacher's just talking at you and you don't understand it, you kind of feel like you're beneath everyone else, because if they all get it and you don't, you're like, well, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm not going to do well in this exam or assessment or even just in class. And a lot of people don't want to put their hands up because they feel embarrassed to ask a question because they think it's going to be a stupid question or something like that. And so if you find this way, like Solution Fluency, that you can understand everything and you have a structured process, I think everyone will benefit from that, absolutely.
I almost think of it as kind of like the Solution Fluency as almost like a clutch, because it's like the teachers hold your hand up until like year 10, and I found the jump from year 10 into 11 quite like,
yeah, it's kind of a push in the deep end.
And I feel like, so they're holding your hand the whole way and then they let go and you're on your own. And I feel like if you had Solution Fluency and you'd been learning that and that was your way of learning all the way from K to 12, you still have that. Like, you know, there's nothing, they can let go of your hand, but you still have that and you've had it the whole time and you can keep using it.
And you know how it works and how it fares for you.
Right.
So what inspired you to do all of this Essential Fluencies and global digital citizenship and all the things like that?
My experiences in school, I think every bad experience that could happen to a child happened to me. I had the most horrific K to 12 experience. Yeah, and I had no desire to be involved in education at all, in any way. But I was challenged by somebody, by a publishing company that I was consulting with, that was an educational publisher, and said, well, how would you fix the problem of what to do with education? And how would you fix the world? And I thought, well, that's a really interesting question. I sat and I thought about it, and I thought, you know, the way that we transform the world is to transform a generation. If we can have a generation that know how to solve problems that matter and believe they have the capacity to do so, then we can change anything. And so at that point I realized that, you know, I had a system. I had a way that we could do that. And once you recognize that you have a solution, you can't, if you have any kind of morals or ethics or love for your fellow man, you can't walk away from it. So I just found myself in a position where, gosh, I can't walk away from this. And then every question has always been for me, and it's always the first thing in my mind, is that I do what's best for kids, always. I don't do what's best for the school or the teachers, I do what's best for kids. That's my mantra.
They are the future.
Absolutely. The kids are 15% of our population. Hang on a sec.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, kids are 15% of our population, but they are 100% of the future. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, we've definitely spoken about that in class heaps, yeah.
So that was for me, is we transform what we do with children. And now I'm seeing that happen. I'm seeing students solve problems that matter. I'm seeing students solve the problems of coral bleaching in the oceans or endangered animals and actually bringing them back and saving them. I'm seeing kids solve the problems of war. I'm seeing them look at the challenges in the Middle East and determine how best to create harmony and unity in a diverse multicultural world. And at the prep level and at the year 3 level. And I was in a class last week where the focus and the challenge was how to end racism. And that was the topic. And the curriculum was applied to that. And this young girl, year 2, she looked at me and she said, you know, I'm wondering where racism comes from. And I asked her, I said, well, that's a really great question. Where do you think it comes from? And she said, I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure we're not born with it. Now, if I can shift that thinking at the year 2 level, how have I changed the world? If we do that with 1,000 students, with 10,000 students, how do we change the world? So for me, it becomes very much about how do I do what's best for kids? How do I create a bright future for everyone? So leading to the Global Digital Citizen Foundation, the next logical thing for me to do was to take my life's work and to sign it over to a nonprofit and to give it to a nonprofit so that it could grow. That's maybe not the best financial decision, but it's certainly the best decision for doing what's right for the world. And that's what led me to this. And I certainly started with one teacher and had a vision of more. And now it's been probably over 50,000 teachers in 15 countries. And we just keep growing and growing and growing.
That's incredible.